When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 112. Complete burnout, life stripped away, lost identity, leaving her to ask herself, who am I? To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Jennifer Arthurton. Jennifer is the founder and creator of Old Chicks No Shit, a community and podcast designed to inspire and support midlife women in chasing their dreams and creating their next chapter. Jennifer is a former Fortune 500 marketing executive turned midlife mentor, podcast host, writer, and inspirational speaker. Having survived her own midlife crisis and subsequent course correction, she has a passion for helping women uncover their inherent power and wisdom of a time of life when they often feel overlooked and doubt themselves most. Jennifer runs a mastermind community called the Maven Collective for powerful midlife women on the journey to creating their next chapter. It's not a course or a coaching program, it's a community of shared experiences and learning designed to inspire and elevate each other. Well, hello. Welcome, Jennifer, to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. And honestly, Jennifer, it's really great to have you as a guest on the show today because I just have a lot of gratitude. Like, I'm very grateful for your willingness to be here, for you to tell your story. I feel really fortunate that I get to encounter guests just like you who really allow me, or they give me permission to tap into their vulnerabilities and draw on their strength and insight, and all the inspiration that gets shared in the space is just positively overwhelming, and if that makes any sense. So for me, I believe it's incredibly important that we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma. What do you think?
I completely agree.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so Jennifer, in case you're still wondering, just in case if you are, so this podcast, it's all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know, no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which tends to remain tucked away. So this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So today, my hopeful mission, I'm hoping to be able to do with both of us, both of our contributions, is to be able to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express. And of course, I continue bringing a trend forward, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. So, Jennifer, what immediately comes to mind when you hear this phrase, the mental beauty rethink?
The mental beauty rethink. So for me, I'm going to put it this way. Our thoughts are so important, and we tend to judge our thoughts a lot in terms of, good or bad, as opposed to just being with our thoughts and being curious about them. The ability to have thought is, in my mind, is a true gift, right? And being able to just be with those thoughts as opposed to judging them or wanting to correct them or wanting to change them, I think is in fact beautiful.
That's a really interesting way of describing it. I really like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I also think that along with what you said about our thoughts being so important, and often, yes, we are judging things as good or bad, right or wrong. It's also not just about the thoughts of our own. It's easy for us to do the same with other people as well.
Oh, for sure.
It's really nice to be able to embrace it in a new way and see ourselves in a different way, get curious in a different way, embrace it in a different way, and also be able to do that with others as well.
Yeah, 100%. Having awareness of our thoughts and being able to question them, like, why did that come up for me? Or why do I think that about that person? I mean, it's absolutely a work in progress for me. But when we can open the door to that curiosity, I think we learn a lot, well, about ourselves, and it gives us the opportunity to also learn about other people.
Yeah.
Right. So if we have a judgment about somebody and then getting like, what made me think that? Right. Chances are it's probably something within you to begin with, right? Because that's where all judgment comes from. And, then being able to be able to see that thought and maybe offer yourself some compassion in that moment, which would allow you then to have more compassion for that other person.
Oh, yes. The compassion journey is a really important one for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. All right. So tell me, Jennifer, how ready are you to dive deep with me today and uncover your untold story?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's go for it. All right. So, Jennifer, for our first question, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
Life begins whenever you choose it.
Can you say it again?
Life begins whenever you choose.
Life begins whenever you choose. Okay. So can you say a little bit more about what this title means to you, perhaps without giving away your untold story just yet?
Yeah. I think many of us live lives according to, what we think is expected of us or what other people want from us or the things that we should do. And I feel like this is especially true for us as women, where we're given the rules, the playbook really early on, be a good girl, don't rock the boat, be nice and sweet to everybody, go to school, get a good job, stay there till you retire, somewhere in there, stop and have some kids. And, as we're living this life that maybe belongs to somebody else, it's super easy for us to lose our identity in that. And so I always question, like, if we're living a life that really isn't ours, are we really living our life? Like, are we really living is the question.
Right. Okay. That is very thought-provoking, and it is so true. And I don't think that anything you said was new for anyone, but just the words that you put it in and just kind of extrapolating it and just saying, hey, this is important. This nugget is really important to reflect on and bring to the forefront of anyone's mind. So that's so critical. Okay. Well, this is a great segue for us to get right into your untold story. So give us that snapshot of what it's all about.
Yeah. So in the year leading up to my 50th birthday, I found myself divorced, unemployed, an empty nester, and I was also bedridden with a stress-related illness, to the point where I had to take a leave of absence from my job, a couple of times along the way because I just wasn't functioning well. And when all of those roles and titles, roles that I played in the world and titles were stripped away from me, I realized that I had no idea who I was, like who was the woman underneath all of those roles and responsibilities. And it really led me into a place where I really actually kind of believed that my life was over. Like, I wouldn't say like I was suicidal or anything even close to that, but there was this really kind of sense of defeatedness that because I'm 50 years old, nobody starts over at 50. I'm supposed to be riding off into the retirement sunset on the arm of a handsome man with a pot of gold. And that was not my reality. And I had this very staunch belief that, 50 is the beginning of the end. Like nothing good happens after 50. Because that's what I saw, right? Like that's what was sold to me in our culture, right? Like you're no longer as relevant as you were. You definitely don't look like you used to. And we live in a culture where we are taught that a woman's value is in her ability to have kids, everything that she does for other people, and is her body physically pleasing to somebody outside of her. So when you're in this crux of like this point of life where everything is shifting, so the kids are leaving home, my job is no longer a reality, and I don't look like I used to, right? Gray hair, wrinkles, all of that. You start to question where you fit in. Like, am I still relevant? Am I still needed? And so it sent me on on a downward spiral, and it sent me inwards because instead of blaming the culture, I blamed myself because, I was looking around and everybody else's life seemed to be going along just fine. And mine was in shambles. And I really, truly believe that there was something wrong with me. Like if I had done things right, then I wouldn't be here, right? If I had made better choices, then I wouldn't be here.
It sounds like a lot of self-blaming, yeah?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. A huge amount of self-blaming.
Okay.
Because, in my mind, I had done everything right. Like I had checked off all of the shoulds on the list. I went to good school. I got good grades. I got an excellent corporate job. I worked my way up the ranks. I had a kid. We lived in the suburbs with a nice picket house and all of that. And I kept looking at this list going, but I did it all right. What's wrong? Like what? So it must be me. And I did go into a very deep self-loathing, actually, right? Like my self-confidence was completely nothing. But one of the things that I realized along the way of this was that I had spent my whole life proving that I was enough.
Right.
This wasn't the beginning of it. This was the culmination of me trying to prove that I was enough through in my entire life. So I was very driven, I accomplished great things. I had an excellent job. I got paid well, amazing perks, a great title. And all of that was my face to the world saying, look, you're okay. You're good. You're good.
So it's like you were not just proving it to certain people. It's like I have to prove it to the whole world.
To the world. Yeah, absolutely.
And so this idea of I wasn't enough or I'm not enough, how far back do you think it went?
I mean, I can see that now, but that was from as early as I can remember in my childhood.
Right.
Okay. When I was 6 years old, I had this teacher who, she was very, very old. She was so old. In fact, she taught my dad. That's how old she was.
Wow.
And I remember, this is one of the clearest memories I have is, we used to get the printing homework, with the lines, and letters had to be within the lines and they had to be perfect, and she would mark them. And my printing was not good. It still isn't good, actually. But every day I would take that book into school and hoping that this would be the day that she would finally praise me or give me a green check mark. And every day she would find something wrong with what I had done. Right. And, and she used to tell me all the time, you're a bad writer. You're just a bad writer, And I honestly believe that had a big impact on how I saw myself. I was still in that, core developmental stage of life. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so impeccable. I mean, I remember experiences like that as well as a child, and other people have shared both on the podcast and offline as well about these simple moments, but they sometimes really take their mark. And it really influences certain narratives that we end up operating under, and obviously not knowing that that's what we're operating under, but it really takes a hold of us.
Yeah, for sure.
Wild. It's
Yeah.
just
Well, I
wild.
mean, the programming is being installed
Yes.
like
Yeah,
between
yeah,
the
yeah.
ages of 1 and 7, right? And so that's part of the programming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's so much that we don't realize that children are susceptible to, and just the conditioning and everything that happens, as you said, with the programming from that young age. Like we know it, we talk about it all the time, but to see the ramifications, like that negative impact and what that could actually
Hmm.
look like, I don't think sometimes people
Yeah.
have that awareness, even for persons who do have a lot of awareness. I think it still gets missed.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure.
So at this, year leading into your 50th birthday, all these things happening to you, you said you ended up having to take time off work, correct?
Hmm. Hmm.
So what was it like to be able to kind of keep meeting that, oh, I'm not well enough, I have to take time off work? Because I imagine if you were climbing that executive ladder, right? Really climbing the ranks, as you said, how did you manage to tell yourself, I need to take time off?
Yeah. It was interesting because, it all kind of started with my divorce, really.
Hmm.
And when I was going through my divorce, I did not tell a single solitary person in my office what was happening in my life
Okay.
because I didn't want them to think that I couldn't handle my life, that,
Mhm.
that so, there would be many days that I would be at work, and I'd be put on a good game face, but inside I was crushed. But I never
Mhm.
let anybody see it. And I would sometimes go into my office, I would close the door, or I'd go to the bathroom, I'd have a good cry, and then I'd put on
Mhm.
my game face again, and then I would come back out.
Mhm.
And as time went on, I was basically like stuffing down all of this emotion. And I remember even being at a party with a friend of mine. So this is not just at work, it was actually even with my friends. And I
Mhm.
remember a friend of mine saying to me, wow, you make this divorce thing look so easy. And I
Oh.
remember thinking at the time that she said that to me, I'm like, oh my goodness, what a lie, because I am literally crushed on the inside. But on the outside, everybody was like, oh, she's just sailing through this, right?
Mhm.
Nothing stopping her. So then, I was stuffing all this emotion. And then over time, it got to the point where had stopped sleeping. Like
Mhm.
I was I was getting sick a lot. And then I stopped sleeping. Like I would sleep 2 or 3 hours a night. And then I would get up the next day and go to work, like go to the gym. Cause I used to go to the gym before I was that person in the gym at like 6:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Actually before 6:30.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. That's early, Jennifer.
Yeah. Well, I used to go to the gym and then I would go to the office. And then, but I would, after 2 or 3 hours of sleep for like weeks and weeks and months on end, I was feeling fine, right? Like I kept thinking, like, why aren't I tired? Um,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was kind of weird. But at the same time, I did find myself like I was crying at work a lot and little things would just set me off. And, I was a bit of an emotional wreck. But at some point, I processed this thought that I was like, this is not good. Like, this is not going to end well. I'm not sleeping and I'm doing all of this stuff. So I had enough of a conscious thought to be like, you need to get this in check before something really bad happened.
What got you there to be like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Like, this doesn't look like it's gonna go well for me.
Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
it was like just an intuitive nudge.
Mm,
I can't say there was anything in particular that precipitated it, but I
yeah.
just had this overwhelming feeling that like, this is not good. It's not going to end well. You got to get a grip on this. So I took time off work.
Okay.
I took a leave of absence, and then that leave of absence is actually what snowballed into me no longer having a job to come back to.
Oh no.
Yeah, so that was kind of like the thing. I think that me taking that leave of absence was a little bit of the steamroller, because even when I was supposed to come back to work, like the week that I was supposed to come back to work, I remember my boss calling me, and I used to travel a lot at the time, and he said to me, "Oh, I think it was in San Francisco. So for Toronto to San Francisco, he's like, can you be in San Francisco on Tuesday morning, but I need you back in the office on Thursday," which means I would have had to have done red eye flights both ways, right?
Oh my gosh. No sleeping.
Yeah. And I just remember thinking, like, God, I don't know if I can do it. But I was like, okay, you know what? This is what I got to do. And it was in the process of that where I was like, okay, this is insanity. Like this
Mm-hmm.
can't go on that way. And then it kind of became the slow unraveling of my job. So then my job ended, and I was at the point now where I was a bit of a wreck, right? Like I just wasn't functioning. Like I couldn't
Right.
even go to the grocery store. I had no energy left. I was
Mm-hmm.
physically depleted. Like even a trip to the grocery store, I would have to have a nap before I could put the groceries away. Like it was exhausting. I remember taking my daughter back to university, and not being able to get out of the car to help her unload it because I was that exhausted.
So the fatigue was really intense, like so
It
intense.
finally caught up with me. And
Okay.
what was interesting about that was, even though I was in the middle of this like complete emotional and physical like burnout breakdown, there was a part of me that thought I could hang on to some semblance of my old life. And that was for me to go to the gym. Right. So I would still get up in the morning and try and go to the gym. And at the time I had a trainer, and I walked into the gym one morning and she said to me, she just came in and she was just staring at me. And I was like, what's going on? And she's like, I can't do this with you anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? She's like, I won't participate. Like, your body is talking to you in no uncertain terms and you are not listening, and I won't participate in it. And she fired me as a client.
Oh my goodness. But good on her for
amazing
for calling you out on it, right? Like saying, hey, I see things. I don't know why you're not seeing them.
Yeah.
But I see them, and this is not going to be conducive in any way.
Right. But that for me was the last bit of control that I thought I had over my life, because everything seemed so out of control. Like my health seemed out of control. Like, I no longer had a married. My kids at that point had moved away to university 3 hours away. Like, it was unraveling. And this was like the last piece that I could hang on to. And I remember getting so angry at her. Like, who does she think she is? She has no idea what she's talking about. And I just went on this rage. And then probably about 2 weeks later, I was like, oh, okay. I see it. Like, I see what she's saying. And I actually did, thank her for it. But that was the beginning for me of okay, you have to let go now, because I was trying to control it all, because that's what had worked for me my entire life. Like, I was always in control. Never let them see you cry. Never, like, make sure that everything's all, together. It's all going perfectly.
Yes, if I'm in control, if I'm composed, if I
exactly
have myself prepared and I have an answer, I have a solution, then we're good.
Right. And now it was like my life was unraveling in front of me and I couldn't control it and I couldn't stop it. And when I got to that place where I'm like, okay, I just need to let go, because a huge part of it was like, and I think this is true for so many people, I had invested a lot in my life to get to where I was. Right. And the thought of just like letting go and seeing what happened was terrifying to me. Right. Because if I wasn't controlling it, who was controlling it? Like, what's going to happen? This is the beginning and the end. And in hindsight, letting go and just letting things, like surrendering to what was in that particular moment, was, again, a huge, huge gift. And it was the beginning of the rebuilding. I did not see that at the time because, all I was basically too sick to get out of bed. All the things that had kept me busy in my life were now gone. I was living on my own for the very first time in my life ever, like having gone from college to roommates to, being married. So I would lie in bed every day and just stare at the ceiling and be like, why me? What's wrong with me? Why can't I keep this life together? Right.
Right. I'm curious about one thing. So, I mean, it might not be so important, but I don't know. I'm just so curious. So you originally had that leave of absence from work, and then when it was time for you to come back, you were kind of being asked to do this, like red eye to red eye.
Yeah.
So is it because you decided not to do it that led to sort of a change in the employment status? Or is it that you did the 2 red eye flights and made it back, and then you were spoken to about something?
No. So I did. I went back and I did, try to resume my job. Although, so what had happened was, when I was on a leave of absence, another woman had taken my place. And I still don't to this day fully understand what happened, but I had been in that company for almost 12 years. And when I came back from that leave of absence, I got the worst performance review I had ever had in my career. And I was like, wow, what happened? Like,
How's that possible? Yeah.
Right. And, I kept, when I went to HR and I asked them, they said, oh, your employee satisfaction scores weren't good. And I was like, that's really interesting, because if there was one thing I prided myself on, was the relationship that I had with my teams. That was super, super important to me. I'm a huge people person. Like, that one thing was more important, and I invested there more than anything. Like, had they told me you didn't do your expenses on time, I could have believed that.
Right.
Because Administratively, yes, that was,
Yeah.
but
managing people and the people relationships, that was how you thrived. That was important. And it was part of what aligned with your value system.
right. So no, I kept asking for, can you show me the reports? Because if I'm not doing something as a manager and a leader, like it's really important to me to make sure.
Yeah. How can I course correct? Like where did I go wrong? Yeah.
Yeah. And nobody would actually show me I couldn't get copies of this employee satisfaction score. Like nobody would show it to me. So then I took matters into my own hands and I went to every one of my staff and I said to them, look, I heard, I didn't get very good ratings. And, I really, really want to know, like, honestly, like, just be totally frank with me. Like, how can I improve? What can I do better? Like, I'm obviously not serving you well. And they were all looking at me like, what are you talking about? And, they had said to me, well, none of them had apparently rated me poorly on any of the things that managers are supposed to be rated on.
Right.
And then, so it turned out that when I actually went to my direct boss, he told me that the rating that I had gotten on this performance review was actually not the rating that had been submitted, and that somewhere up the line, it had gotten degraded, let's say. So I was like, oh, this is very interesting. And I still, to this day, don't really understand what happened, but it really, I had to really ask myself if I was going to fight this. Like, what am I? Because I mean, I had just come back from a leave of absence, and I thought I had pretty good guns to fight it, but I actually had to ask myself, like, am I going to fight this? Like,
yeah. And that probably was part of your reflection too, right? Even if at the beginning you were in more of the victim place of like, why me? What's going to happen to my life? But like, it must have really helped you with your reality check of like, okay, what do I really need? What's really important for me?
Yeah. Well, so, and this was something interesting that happened too, is because like in the midst of all of this, one day I felt very, very compelled to go to a meditation class. And I had never, I mean, I tried meditation many, many times in my life. I had, considered it an abject failure. It wasn't for me. My mind was too busy. But for whatever reason, that particular class just really, really stuck out to me. And I remember that I was traveling on business and I had to take a standby flight home to make sure that I was going to be there for the class. And I went into the meditation class. There's like, it's a dimly lit room. There's candles, there's yoga mats. There's about 5 or 6 people in the class with me. I go in, I sit down on the mat. It's a guided meditation. The instructor begins. And as this is all starting, I can feel this like well of emotion starting to come up inside me. And I was like, okay, what's happening? What's going on? I had no idea what was going on. And I was like, okay, get it together, hold it down, do whatever you need to do. Because again, this is part of mine, like my armor, never let them see you cry. And I couldn't control it. And what happened was I ended up basically crying, not just crying, but sobbing through that whole class. The instructor at one point just came over and put a box of Kleenex on my mat. And then she smiled and nodded at me. And I sat there like just again, I just surrendered to this emotion. I couldn't hold it down any longer. And it literally just spilled over. I thought I was going crazy. Like I thought I was losing my mind because I was like, I don't even know what I'm crying about. Like, why is this like, and it's like, I'm not crying. I'm like sobbing. The end of the class comes around, I'm leaving the classroom. I've got, 2 mitts full of snotty Kleenex. There's mascara running down my face. And the instructor still hasn't said a word to me, but she keeps smiling and nodding at me. And then she said to me as I was leaving, she said, oh, I'm starting an 8-week series if you'd like to sign up. And before I even knew what I was doing, I signed up. And I went back to that class and I think probably 4 or 5 out of 8 of those classes, I literally sat on my mat and I cried. And I had no idea why, but I was like, okay, something's trying to come out. So we're going to let it. And I also can't control this. So
permission to feel.
Yeah. And releasing everything that I had been stuffing down inside me for years and years and years and years came to the surface. When I was thinking about my job and, I have grounds to fight this, I could fight this and keep my job. There was a part of me that was like, what are you fighting for exactly? Because, in the previous years leading up to that, I had found myself in boardrooms, in meetings, kind of half listening and thinking to myself, is this it? Like, is this what I worked so hard for? Like, is this really what I wanted?
Yeah, like it doesn't seem as exciting as the idea of attaining it, right? So you're there
Right.
and it's like, is this what it is?
Is this it? And and then I
Yeah.
would push that thought aside because
Mm,
I mean, it was a little too scary to deal with because again, I had invested a lot. I had checked all the boxes. I had done
right.
all the right things. So if it wasn't this, what was it? Like too scary to entertain.
Right.
At that point, I was like, okay, you know what? We're just going to let go again and
Mm-hmm.
see what happens. And so that was like the end of my job where I was like, okay, you know, I managed to get a pretty decent severance out of them. Then I just kind of returned to my quiet little house all by
Mm-hmm.
myself and sat in my bed just crying and asking myself, what's next? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, is this the beginning of the end? Like, you know, is there any hope for me? Like, just asking
Mm-hmm.
questions after questions after questions. So it was a pretty low time in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And did you have anyone else that was there to support you? Like, I mean, did your family know? Did your daughter know? Like anyone in your close circle, were they aware of what you were going through or what was going on for you?
Not initially, because again, I was like, you know, I have to be the one to hold it together for everybody else. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know, people knew that, you know, was having some health challenges. They knew, you know, it was to do with sleep and stuff like that, but I didn't fully share the extent of it for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually what happened was I felt really called to start writing. And then I started just, you know, writing my own experience just to see what, you know, just as an
Mm-hmm.
outlet, because
Mm-hmm.
I was, you know, too sick to get out of bed. But sometimes I would go and walk across the street to the park across the street from my house, and I would sit under a tree. And that's when I was like, okay, I'd bring my journal with me and I would
Mm-hmm.
just write. And then after a period of writing, again, I kind of got this nudge that was like, okay, you should publish some of this. And
Mm,
again, and I remember thinking, like, why am I going to put all my stuff out there for everybody to see? Like, the person who wanted nobody to know anything was now going to publish some of the stuff that she had written about a very personal journey for the world to
mm-hmm.
see. And I remember writing a blog post and hitting publish on it and having to sit on my hands for like 3 or 4 days
Right.
to not go back and delete it. Like, I was having an intense
Right.
vulnerability hangover.
Wow. Yeah. The
Yeah.
urge.
And I kept thinking, like, why am I doing this? Why am I putting my stuff
What
out
have I
there for
just done?
everybody to
Yeah,
see? Yeah.
exactly.
And the beautiful part about it was, you know, after I started publishing this, is that there were other women who were maybe different circumstances, but their situation was the same. And that was me realizing that, oh, maybe this isn't just a me problem. Maybe this is a we problem, because we're
Mm,
all going through this immense transition, like physically,
mm-hmm.
mentally, emotionally. Everything in our life is changing at this particular point in time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a person who, and a lot of the women who are reaching out to me were, you know, like me, corporate women who had it together, were very polished and accomplished
Mm-hmm.
and ambitious, were feeling challenged with these thoughts that they were having about, you know, what's next? I can't keep doing this, or this longing for something that they didn't know what it was. So it was the beginning of important connection, which for me, I mean, if there is a word that would characterize my healing journey, it would be connection.
Mm. And connection is your healing word.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. And so, all right. So tell me something,
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer. Sometimes when people come to see me for therapy in the therapy space, you know, individuals, they're typically in one of three places. They're getting started, they're in the middle, or looking back. And getting started is like, they're like, you know, I'm here for therapy. I know it's good for me. And I just have a whole bunch of stuff to start unraveling. Or here, let me, you know, share my story with you in blocks and then we can figure out what I need to navigate. Some people, they're in the thick of something and it's triggering other stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
they're in the middle. And some people, maybe they're looking for closure, like they're looking back, but they want to close some chapters in their life or gain some meaning, new insight, so they can move forward. So for yourself, with regards to your untold story, where would you say that you are? Would you say that you're getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I'm definitely looking back.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
how do you know you're looking back?
I mean, okay, so I say I'm looking back because we are constantly evolving, and my journey is not over. Every day I learn more and more about myself and what it is that I want for my life, and, who I am as a person. So that woman that I was so disconnected from and finally got to meet, I'm still getting to know her every single solitary day. But what I do know is, looking back, is that there are certain markers, let's say, that, like my journey through self-love, for example. I can honestly say that I love who I am today. I have so much respect for who I am today. And previous to that, I had no self-esteem. Like, my self-esteem was based on my accomplishments or my title. So yes, the journey continues, but there are chapters of it that have closed. And that chapter about self-love and acceptance and really getting to know myself, aside from the roles that I played in the world, like, that chapter is closed.
Right.
Yeah.
And so because you've been able to get to know yourself intimately, right? That's how you know you're actually looking back on this part of your untold story. And
Correct.
of course, in life is a journey, so it's not over. And so there's always more to learn and get curious about. But in terms of that part of your story, that part of your journey, this is how you know you're looking back, because you intimately know yourself.
Yeah. And love myself for who I am.
Love yourself and accept yourself fully, unconditionally, completely, the whole works.
Exactly.
Amazing. Okay. So your story is so thought-provoking. There's just so much depth and so much rawness and so much like vulnerability in what you're sharing and how you're sharing it. I'm really curious if you can share a little bit more about how your untold story has affected your mental health. So, how was your mental health impacted during this time that we've been unpacking? So, you talked about having the stress-related illness. We're talking about burnout. We're talking about self-loathing. All of those things. Can you speak a little bit more to those pieces?
Yeah. I mean, I was building a house on a shaky foundation. Let's put it that way. Right.
Okay.
So I was out there in my life going, doing, accomplishing, but the foundation on which that was built was shaky to begin with. So at some point that house of cards was going to fall. Like, it had to, right? It was like building a house on sand. When you build a sand castle, when it starts to slide, the whole thing just slides, right? Like, it's not just like a piece falls off. It's like
Yeah, it just gets wiped. Yeah.
It just gets, the whole thing just slides into the ground.
Right.
I see now what I didn't see then was that the foundation that, like, and we had talked about this before, the foundation that I had built it off on is I'm not enough. Right. And if I can just go and do and accomplish these things, then the world will see me as enough. Even though I still didn't believe I was enough, no matter how much I accomplished, I couldn't fill that hole.
Well, because your focus at the time was external validation, right? What everyone else sees, what I can show everyone else. It's not about what I see, because it doesn't matter what I see. They have to see it. That's the narrative that you had based on the I'm not enough, which is a very basic feeling for like human growth.
Exactly. But so, building the house on that foundation of not enough, it takes an immense amount of energy to constantly be doing something to prove to other people. And I didn't realize how much energy I was expending. And now it explains why I got physically and mentally and emotionally burned out, because the amount of energy it takes to put into that, to build this facade, right, that everybody sees and thinks, oh, look at her, isn't she doing really well? Like, it's just it's being held together with Band-Aids and tape in the back end.
Right.
Right. Like I said, it doesn't surprise me that I got burnt out, because I use the analogy all the time of like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. At some point it's going to pop up. Right. And you're going to struggle a lot to hold it there. And that's basically what I was doing in my life. Right. And so that physical, mental, and emotional depletion, now I look back on it as being a gift, because it really brought me to the bottom of to the bottom, right, of having to really, really face what it was. And I remember coming out of my divorce, the first relationship that I had out of that, like, that was just another complete disaster that left. If I had a shred of self-esteem going into it, it was zero by the time that was all said and done. And I just remember thinking to myself, if I want my life to be different, then I have to show up differently in it. And that was the beginning of, for me, a very deep personal development and spiritual journey, And that was the time I hired my first coach. I hired my first coach because I was like, I need somebody to show me the things that I can't see, because obviously I can't see some things here. Right.
Right.
And so if I can see these things, then I know where I need to focus, what I need to work on. So it, like I said, it was hell at the time because I was at the lowest of lows.
Mm-hmm.
And really beating myself up, like so badly beating myself up and comparing myself to everybody, like everybody.
Right.
And it actually hearkened me back to a time in my 20s, in my very early 20s, where I used to do the same thing. Like sometimes I would, I would have to take the train to school. And sometimes by the time I got to school, I would have compared myself to every single solitary person that I saw on that journey. And some days I would get to school and I would feel so small that I would have to turn around and go back home because I couldn't face the day.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like this reflection back to that time where I was like, oh, look, here I am again. And I was like, okay, this can't happen. I'm not doing round 2 of this again. And so that was the thing that was just like, okay, you got to fix some things here. And I was pointed back to myself.
Yeah. So you had those aha moments of, okay, this is what I can do different, or this needs to be different. These things, this is the nugget right here. If I keep doing it like this is what's going to stay the same. But if I choose something else, then I could, have a chance at something different.
And what's interesting about that was those choices were really the first choices that I ever made for myself, really, when I look back at my entire life. Because other than that, I had lived by the rules. I had checked all the boxes. I had done everything everybody had expected of me. I realized I hadn't actually made a conscious choice about my life. And now this was the first time at the age of 50 that I was like, okay, you got to start making some choices and choosing different things.
Right.
Yeah.
What was it like when you made that? When you made that first choice to choose yourself, to make a conscious choice, do you remember what that feeling was like?
Yeah. It started really small because I really just started like tapping into myself, asking myself a lot of questions like, what do you want? Right. And it could be as simple as, what do you want for lunch today?
Sure.
Right.
That's the best way to start. Just starting that small. Yeah.
Right. I want an orange. Okay, then we're going to eat an orange. Right. So it was those kinds of things.
Right. But even when you told yourself, like, what am I going to have for lunch? Or do I want an orange? Or I'm going to eat an orange? And then to actually act on it, because it doesn't really matter how small the decision is, right? It's more about the experience of it. So what was that like?
It was liberating. So it was liberating, but at the same time, there's that voice in the back of your head, the one that's always been running the show. That's like, you need to have some protein, right? Because I had been into fitness before that, right? You need to have some protein. Right. Really, you should have a salad with chicken instead of just an orange. Like there was always this like kind of chatter going in the back end, and I'd be like, no, I'm going to eat an orange, right? Like that's what I would do. And so it was the first time like I had actually like almost stood up for myself against this chatter.
Yeah. And the auto habit, right? Because sometimes there's things that go on autopilot for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So you even learned to speak up and fight back.
Yeah.
I'm having an orange.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it went from there. And I remember there was one point of my journey where I remember thinking, okay, I'm 50. I'm probably going to live till like I'm like 85 or 90. So that means I have like 35 or 40 years ahead of me, right? Like it's a whole lot of time to be able to,
or more,
God willing, right? Like that I can just begin to make different choices. And like, I have this whole other chapter ahead of me that I hadn't actually thought of, because before it was kind of, I hadn't thought of my life in this next chapter. I hadn't thought of my life, what it was going to be at 50 or 60 or 70. I'd never given that any thought. Because nobody asked me, what are you going to be doing when you're like, and it wasn't on the checklist, right?
Yeah, I'm like that. Because with that checklist, it's like, well, if you do those things, there's outcomes that go with those choices, right? With that prescription, with that script. So there's no such thing as looking at what does my future hold, or what does my future life look like.
Because I was waiting for somebody to tell me, right?
Right.
So it was very empowering. So those thoughts, and then taking those small actions, and even like writing about my experience, right? Like that was another one point where, you know, the voice in my head was like, what are you doing? Like, you want everybody to know you're a failure. Like, you want everybody to see the mess you've made of your life. But then there was this other part of me that was going, yeah, but you just need to share because maybe there's other people who are in the same place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were able to even let your inner critic know how to stay quiet.
Yeah.
Your volume is a bit loud, and this other voice, I know it's new, but it's actually quite much nicer. It's actually much more pleasant.
Exactly.
And it's more forgiving. It's more encouraging. It's allowing me to embrace all parts of myself more. So it felt more inviting for you to stick with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. All right. So go ahead and tell us, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
I want everybody to know that no matter where you are starting from, you can choose again. You can choose a completely different life, one choice at a time, one step at a time. And you will be amazed how those choices will add up and take you to places that you had never dreamed were possible.
So making the impossible possible, one choice at a time.
One choice at a time. Yep.
That is so powerful. That's a very lovely message. Okay. So tell me about game-changing inspiration. So for you, I'm really curious what that game-changer inspiration would have looked like for you that closely reflects your untold story. So at any point during this pivotal time, was there like a quote, a book, or a person or an event or something that really spoke volumes for you that kind of sparked something like for you?
Yeah. So a quote and a book. So the quote is from an ancient philosopher by the name of Lao Tzu. And he says, when I let go of who I am, I can become who I might be.
Say it one more time.
When I let go of who I am, I become who I might be.
That is so... sent little shivers down my spine. That's a great quote.
And I really saw that quote as an invitation to go inwards, because there's so many parts of ourselves that are yet to be explored, right? Like the parts that come to the surface are the parts that we need to do what we need to do to get through day-to-day life. But there's all this other parts of who we are. And so that for me was the invitation to really go deep in my own self-exploration. And the other one, I read a book called Return to Love by Marianne Williamson.
Yes.
It's based on A Course in Miracles.
Yes.
And I used to listen to that. I would go for when I could start walking again. Even actually, I started listening to this at the when I had gone back to work after my leave of absence and I would have to take the subway to work, I would listen to this book on my way to work. And then, it became instrumental. I've probably listened to that book and read, between reading it, physically reading it and listening to it, probably 10 or 12 times. And it really was an eye opener to like how we show up in the world. Right. And what's the energy that we're giving to the world, and that we can literally change our lives by changing what's happening on the inside, because the inside is what's reflected outside. And the beautiful part about that, what felt really good for me is like, I feel out of control in every aspect of my life. But if there's one thing I can control, it's me. What I do, what I choose, I can control that. And so that felt like a branch of hope that I could begin there. And honestly, it was a huge turning point for me.
That is great inspiration. All right. So tell us, what is a cause or an organization that has been really impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to?
I alluded to this earlier around community, because for me, because I would consider myself like an emotional loner, like everything was happening inside me and I never shared it with anybody. When I got into community with like-minded people and realized that I was not the only one who was struggling with these, like other people were having the same thoughts and feelings that I have, it was a true gift to be able to see that. I actually created what I wished I'd had on that journey, which is the Maven Collective, which is the mastermind group that I run for midlife women who are reinventing themselves or some part of their lives, to be able to come together in community. Because as humans, we're pack animals. We never meant to do it alone.
Sure.
As much as we get fooled into thinking that we are. And so having this group of women who can witness and support each other, who act as accountability, a group of women who can hold your belief in you and your dreams on the days that you are struggling, who can reflect your skills, your talents, and your light back to you. Like I watch the women in this community absolutely thrive on each other, right? Like on that support, on that sharing, and the learning that happens. It's so beautiful to watch. And it's also has been part of my own healing journey as well too, right? Like creating this community, creating this holding the space for these women and, watching them thrive it's hugely inspirational for me as well.
Full circle.
Yeah.
So let us know. How can people connect with you if they would like to? What platforms are you on? How are you findable? Where are you findable?
My social media playground is Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
And I can also find me on LinkedIn and then also on my website.
Perfect. Good news is that we have actually grabbed all of your links ahead of time. So they should all be on your show notes page now. So people can just click on that and get connected to you if they are ready to or would like to. So, Jennifer, guess what?
What?
You've just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It was a great conversation.
I think it was an awesome conversation. In fact, Jennifer, I would just like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the deep story shared in this space today. Speaking about all that led to your turmoil experience within the span of 1 year, that divorce, the burnout, the insomnia, the job loss, being an empty nester, feeling the deep loss of your identity and all the familiar roles that you were feeling were taken from you and restarting at 50. Honestly, that pivot you made and sharing all the nuts and bolts of what it took for that to inspire, like, wow. I'm truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story today. So thank you for that deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing. You rock.
Thank you so much for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Awesome. Once again, Jennifer, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.